Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: Beijing says fentanyl is a US problem, not China. And Syrian government says protecting Druze citizens is a priority. More coming up on AWANI International. Our first top story for tonight: China has reiterated that fentanyl is a US problem, not China's. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian says US tariffs over fentanyl has severely impacted anti-drug cooperation between both countries, urging for more mutually beneficial dialogue.
The remarks followed US President Donald Trump's claim on Wednesday that China may soon hand down death sentences for fentanyl crimes, expressing hope for a breakthrough on drug control talks. Fentanyl has become a major flashpoint in US-China ties. Washington blamed China for failing to stop the flow of precursor chemicals for fentanyl, fueling thousands of US overdose deaths. Beijing, in turn, accused Washington of using the crisis to blackmail China. Trump imposed 20% tariffs on Chinese goods in February over the issue, and they remain in place despite a fragile trade truce agreed in May. Beijing, meanwhile, has stepped up its counter-narcotics efforts in recent weeks, including adding 2 fentanyl precursors to its list of controlled substances starting this Sunday.
Here is the latest development in Syria. In a televised speech today, Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, said protecting Druze citizens and their rights is a priority. His remarks come as Israel launched multiple airstrikes in Damascus, targeting the defense ministry and an area near the presidential palace. Now, fighting continues in Suwaida after a ceasefire between government forces and Druze armed groups collapsed. Israel claimed its intervention is to protect the Druze, whom it sees as a potential ally in Syria, vowing to destroy government forces attacking the group and demanded they withdraw. Clashes erupted between Druze militias and Sunni Bedouin tribes, prompting Syrian forces to deploy to Suwaida on Tuesday and declare ceasefire, but fighting quickly resumed. The government said on Wednesday it began withdrawing forces from the city and announced a new truce with the Druze, though it is still unclear if the deal will hold. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, meanwhile, said Washington has engaged all sides and agreed on steps to help end the conflict. At the same time, Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim condemned Israel's strikes on Damascus, calling for an end to violations of international and humanitarian law. Right, we have more after this break. Stay tuned.
Berita hebat untuk pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Prime Video kini termasuk dalam langganan anda.
Who's the action hero now?
Anda boleh stream 24 jam sehari. Pelbagai filem kesukaan anda.
Amazing.
On Janab. Hindustan.
Amazon Originals.
It's big.
Are you ready?
Serta K-Favorites terkini. Semua ni dan banyak lagi.
Kalian pilih video siapa yang akan tayang.
Pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Stream Prime Video sekarang dengan Astro. Anda juga boleh langgan Prime Video melalui aplikasi My Astro.
Welcome back. China's economy grew 5.2% in the second quarter, outpacing expectations and driven by strong exports. But with a new round of Trump's tariffs looming and export momentum potentially slowing down, can the recovery hold? Joining us to break down China's latest economic data is Mio Azalan, senior economist at MBSB Investment Bank.
When we see from an overall picture of the first half of the year, China export rose by 5.9%, totaling around $1.8 trillion. During this period, shipment grew in agriculture, fertilizer, and textile. Also, we see that the key factor of China's overall trade expansion has been a successful diversification away from the US market. Exports to the ASEAN saw a significant rise, roughly around 12% in the first half of 2025. For the 6 months of the year, China imports fell by 3.9% to $1.2 trillion, dragged by the drops from the US, EU, and Russia, while shipments from ASEAN countries rose. Therefore, the first half of 2025, China recorded a total trade surplus. So, in terms of economic recovery, so we saw the first half of 2025 has been stronger than previously expected, supported by government supportive policy measures.
Miao also warned that the fragile and temporary US-China trade truce could also slow China's long-term recovery and affect global economic stability.
Without a comprehensive new trade deal, the default is for tariff to resume or even increase. However, China export momentum may pick up due to front-loading, but with a risk of front-loading reversal. So we think that the recent surge in China exports in June was partly due to companies rushing shipments to beat August deadline, indicating current momentum is temporary due to the truce, not much of a sustainable trend. The US also, at the moment, one of the key risks is that the US is also targeting transshipment via third countries. For example, a 40% tariff on Vietnamese transshipment, closing sort of avenues by the Chinese exporter to bypass tariff. The US has also a stricter rule on origin enforcement to curb the risk of transshipment. This sort of may cause risk to its China export performance. So the upcoming August 25 deadline to reach a new trade agreement adds further pressure and highly uncertain. A failure to secure meaningful progress could lead to a renewed escalation and weigh heavily on China export outlook. Also, a sluggish global demand environment, particularly in a major market like US and EU, could also weigh on China's export growth. So I think in summary, we think China has demonstrated resilience through trade diversification and strategic industrial shift. However, we think its economic recovery remains fragile due to internal demand weakness and persistent threat to escalating trade uncertainty. Global economy should brace for potential continued uncertainty and potential disruption from the US-China trade war and geopolitical landscape.
The U.S. Federal Communications Commission says it plans to ban undersea cables that use Chinese technology from connecting to the U.S. The FCC will vote next month on new rules aimed at reducing espionage risks by making U.S.-bound cables less vulnerable to threats from China and other adversaries.
Washington has long voiced concerns over China's role in global network traffic and potential espionage. The FCC began weighing tougher rules last year, including banning equipment from companies it deems security threats, like Huawei, China Telecom, and China Mobile. The agency says submarine cables are becoming increasingly vital as the U.S. expands data centers and AI-driven infrastructure. The Commission is expected to approve the new rules on August 7th. Once adopted, any group using banned Chinese tech will be blocked from getting FCC licenses to build or operate US-linked cables and from leasing capacity on others.
The U.S. Senate has approved President Donald Trump's plan to cut $9 billion in foreign aid and public broadcasting funds. The Republican-led chamber passed the measure 51-48 after a session that ran past midnight.
Most cuts targeted foreign aid for disease, war, and natural disasters. The plan also includes eliminating the $1.1 billion funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was set to receive over the next 2 years. Trump and many Republicans view public broadcasting as wasteful and criticize its news coverage as biased against the right. The $9 billion in cuts is a small fraction of the $6.8 trillion federal budget and part of broader reductions led previously by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. The bill now returns to the House for final approval with a Friday deadline. If not passed, the White House must spend the funds as originally allocated by Congress.
The Trump administration is being sued by 20 states seeking to block the cancellation of a program that provides federal funding for natural disaster mitigation projects. The states argue that the executive branch has no authority to shut down a program approved by Congress.
The suit, led by Washington and Massachusetts, argued that shutting down the Federal Emergency Management Agency's flagship program violated the principle of separation of powers. The states warned that communities nationwide would be forced to delay, scale back or cancel hundreds of projects that have been in development for years. The program has helped states, local governments, territories and tribal nations reduce hazard risks. It had funded infrastructure projects such as stormwater control systems and relocating or elevating buildings in flood-prone areas. The agency announced in April that it was ending its Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program and cancelling all applications from 2020 to 2023.
A Democrat-authored report warns that the U.S. is losing strategic ground to China, blaming President Donald Trump's foreign policy. The report, which examines Trump's first 6 months in office, argues that his approach has undermined Washington's ability to compete with Beijing.
It cites staff cuts at the State Department and funding reductions for the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, as moves that have weakened American power and influence. As Trump pulled back from the global stage, the report said China was expanding its influence, strengthening relationships, and reshaping the global order to its advantage. It noted that China had moved to fill the void left by Trump's withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement, boosting funding overseas and expanding its diplomatic footprint. It also warned that Trump's tariff war against U.S. trade partners has damaged economic relationships and pushed some allies closer to Beijing. The report was recently published by Democratic members of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It comes alongside the release of a survey by Pew Research Center, which found that China is now seen as the world's top economic power with a slight edge over the US. According to Pew, attitudes towards China have improved in 15 out of 25 countries, including Mexico, South Africa, Turkey, and Indonesia, compared with the year before.
U.S. President Donald Trump says CocaCola has agreed to use cane sugar in its U.S. production. In a Truth Social post, Trump thanked CocaCola leadership, calling the move very good.
In response, a Coca-Cola spokesperson said the Atlanta-based company will share details on new offerings soon and appreciates Trump's enthusiasm for the brand. While U.S. Coke typically uses high fructose corn syrup, versions sold in countries like Mexico, the UK and Australia are sweetened with cane sugar. A May report by the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA Commission, appointed by Trump to address chronic disease, warned that high fructose corn syrup may contribute to childhood obesity and related health issues. However, corn producers in the Midwest have long held political influence, while Florida, Trump's home state, is the top U.S. sugarcane producer. According to John Boat, CEO of the Corn Refiners Association, replacing high fructose corn syrup with cane sugar would cost Americans manufacturing jobs, reduce farm income, increase sugar imports, and offer no health benefit.
The European Union has failed to approve a new sanctions package against Russia for a second time. Diplomats say Slovakia vetoed the package during a meeting of EU ambassadors, with Malta also raising an objection.
The sanctions mark the EU's 18th package of measures against Russia over its 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Slovakia's government said it would not approve the package unless it receives concessions on gas supplies. It has been blocking the package over a separate EU plan to phase out Russian gas by the end of 2027. Although that plan is unrelated to the sanctions, Slovakia remains heavily reliant on Russia for energy and argues that a ban on imports would hurt its economy.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching and good night.